be our first speaker, is a senior principal and technical director, cultural resources at Cardinal Construction. Aaron McKendry is a staff archaeologist at Cardinal Construction. Kim Hinder is a senior archaeological historian at Cardinal Construction. And I thought there was one more person, but I guess not. How we got here and why we're having this meeting now is because it is important to get the community's input, I feel, and the people that have been the nucleus of this project. It's important to have the community's input. I can tell you what Zeb would like to do. We might even be able to poll the NAACP to tell you what they would like to do, or we could poll the Heights Reunion Committee, who started this off, to see what they would like to do. But it's important to all of us that the community be involved as we move forward. This meeting will specifically let you know what steps have been done to date as far as researching the cemeteries and as far as what has been found on each of the two sites. As most people know, I believe one site is the Frank Crum site and the other site is at Eggman and Holt. This started because a community member, the Rembrandts, were looking for a family member who had passed and was not able to initially find that loved one. They exhausted their resources and reached out to the Heights Reunion Committee. The Heights Reunion Committee, who is headed by Miss Barbara Sori Love, is the president, reached out to the Clearwater Historical Society. And they had done a great deal of investigating, had gotten Paul Guzzo, who is a Tampa Bay Times reporter, and Emerald Morrow, who is a Channel 10 news reporter, involved. And they had done some research, and it led to that there actually was a cemetery site on what is now the Frank Crum property. The Heights Reunion Committee exhausted their resources and reached out to the NAACP for additional help. And to me, as being president of the NAACP, I think that's how a lot of organizations like the NAACP, the Urban League, and some of these other organizations that serve the community should be engaged. Is when you in your resources, involve the next group that's able to help carry your agenda forward. Once the NAACP became involved, it was a very simple phone call to Mr. Crum. We had set up a meeting with Mr. Crum, and his children were there who are on his board, an attorney, the daughter's an attorney, and the son, I believe, is the vice president. They were very amenable to the Heights Reunion Committee and to the NAACP in our request to have the property scanned that was believed to be the cemetery. We were able to, with the help of USF, have that property scanned, and based on people's recollection, where the initial scan was done, nothing turned up except for some utility poles, water pipes, and that kind of thing. Through the reporting of Emerald and Paul, one of the great grandchildren of the person who owned the cemetery, when it was functioning, reached out to say, you need to look more north and east than where you were, and that's where the actual cemetery was. So with those new coordinates, USF again, we got the permission from Mr. Crum to do one more additional scan. That scan was done, and they were able to find bodies still on that particular site. In doing the research that USF did, it was found that those bodies were supposed to be moved over to where the Eggman and Holt Cemetery is. So that prompted another search of the school property. And for that one, Clint Herbick, the request was made to Clint Herbick, who is the supervisor of schools or of the fiscal properties, and Mr. Horn, Bill Horn, who's the city manager for Clearwater, got involved. And again, they wanted to find out if there was anything there. So they were able to enlist the services of Cardinal Construction, who was also doing the Zion Cemetery ground penetrating radar at the time. And they were able to find bodies on that site also. There was news about that, and then COVID hit when we were about to, in March, have this meeting to inform the community. And that is pretty much where we are now. From that time in March until today, very little has been done on either of the sites, simply because, you know, everybody was on lockdown restrictions. And I thought it important now to go ahead and have this meeting so that when people see, you know, bulldozers pull up or, you know, more work being done at the sites, people don't freak out, so that everybody knows, you know, exactly what's going on. And for that, I think I will now throw it over to Paul Jones to talk about what archaeologists actually do and the process that's going to be done on these sites. So, Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Zeb. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we do. Archaeologists are the technical part of this. We actually provide the information and allow the people that are stakeholders and an opportunity to make decisions about what they want to do. We tell them, we provide information about how many bodies could be buried, what happened, the history of the area, and provide hard evidence of what's gone on in the past. We're generally under contract with an agency, either the state or the local government, or in some cases, as in Zion, the Tampa Housing Authority, to provide them with information to help them make decisions. And that's what we do. We don't make the decisions for you. We provide you with the information you need to make decisions. And that's why it's so important to have a community group like the one that you're putting together that can make those decisions and make determinations about what they want to do in the future. Whether they want to leave this intact as a memorial, whether they want to move it to another location where it's protected, it gives them an option to determine what the best thing is for everyone involved. And the other thing is, when you bring in archaeologists, you bring in people that are folks that treat the remains with the utmost respect and treat them as a very sensitive object, a person in the ground. We're very careful in what we do. And one of the ways we do that is to provide a work plan. And the work plan tells everybody what's to be done. And the work plan is prepared and then sent to the committee and the folks that are paying for the work so that they have an opportunity to make decisions about whether or not that is what they want done. And that's the most important thing, is to get everybody on the same page and to get everybody and to give everybody a voice in what's done, not to say what will be done, but to say what could be done and to reach a consensus for a path forward. And we are an international, Cardno is an international scientific firm. Our Americas division has a specialty in cemeteries and the archaeological management of cemeteries. We've done everything from moved large cemeteries of 500 and more people in a very careful way, so that it was moved so that everything was exactly the same, only the location had changed. In other cases, we have created a situation where people are able to treat it as a memorial and keep it in place and do a very careful a very careful operation so that they can have long-term memorial to what goes on. But archaeologists do a lot of things, and cemeteries are just one of them. But in this case, I think it's really important for you to realize, and for everybody on the phone to realize, that our job is to make sure that you have the opportunity and the committee has the opportunity to decide exactly the way things will be done. And what we do is provide you with options and let you know what those options entail. So that sort of wraps up exactly what we'll do in this particular situation. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions after all this. So I'm going to stop here before I raise too many more questions and allow everybody to have an opportunity to ask whatever questions they need based on the presentations that are coming forward.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for that.
You're welcome.
Next, we're going to have Rebecca O'Sullivan and Jeff Moats talk about the first site that was looked at, and that was the site that is on what is now the Crum property.
Okay, great. Let me just pull up my screen and I'll get started.
All right. And I see Jeff. Jeff, you're muted. I can unmute you if you'd like. But if you want to say something, unmute.
Hi, Zeb. Thanks for having us.
No problem, man. Thanks for coming.
Right.
Okay, everyone can see my slide.
I can.
Okay, good.
Hopefully everybody else can.
Okay. Just like Zeb said, thank you so much for having me. We're really happy to present on our results and what we've found so far. My name is Becky O'Sullivan. Just like Zeb said, I'm an archaeologist. I work for the Florida Public Archaeology Network at our center at USF. Jeff works at the same spot, so we're both on here. We're happy to answer any questions afterwards. Just very briefly, what I'm going to talk about today is first talk about the history and the background research, what we know about the history of the St. Matthew's Baptist Church Cemetery, which is located on the Crum property, and some of the details of how this place was erased over time and the kind of steps along the way of how that happened. Then I'm going to show you the results of the GPR surveys that we've completed to date. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the possible names of people who were buried at St. Matthew's. And then I'm going to talk about some of the recommendations that we gave in the report that we submitted. just, reiterating what Zeb was saying, the reason that we're all here today, and we all know this, is because of the work and the advocacy of community members. And, their memories of this place is what has brought all of this together. Zeb and NAACP reached out to us for help with the GPR survey, a few months back, and Mr. Crum graciously allowed us to come out and survey his property so that we could all find out the truth of what was there. Where was the cemetery located? Was it moved in its entirety? What evidence do we see of any possible graves that are on this property? And the GPR survey that we completed has given us some really good answers to some of those questions. So just to kind of situate us here, obviously this is downtown Clearwater. The property that I'm going to be talking about, the project location is right here on Mr. Crum's property, which is south of Cleveland Street and just west of Missouri in the Clearwater Heights neighborhood. So, to go to the beginnings of the cemetery, we have to look at the beginnings of the church that was associated with it, one of the churches. So in 1902, the St. Matthew's Baptist Church Cemetery was established. The church building still stands at the corner of Seminole and what was then Railroad Avenue, but is today the Pinellas Trail. And this is a picture of how it looks today. Still, having church services, and it's a really cool historic building. In 1909, the St. Matthew's Baptist Church purchased 2.5 acres of land to be used as a cemetery for $150 from Robert Paget, who was a white property owner in this Clearwater Heights area. The cemetery was located away from the church. The church is is farther north of the kind of project area where we're looking. And the cemetery was located in the Clearwater Heights neighborhood, also known as the Mac-Dixon subdivision. But it was also near several other Black churches as part of this African-American neighborhood that was, in this area. So I've got a few aerial photos to kind of go through that help to illustrate some of the history. This one's from 1926. And I've also included some kind of, landmarks to help us look through time. The red square that you see here is the area of the St. Matthew's Baptist Church Cemetery. The orange dashed line is the kind of modern boundaries of Mr. Crum's property. So you can see Cleveland Street up to the north, Missouri down here, and then some of the other buildings and little structures that we can see on the property. Also, interesting to see within this red square, the dark that you see here is vegetation, and these white areas, these are areas that have been cleared. So these could be cleared areas that were for burials, because like I said, the cemetery was started in 1909. So by 1926, we definitely have active burials that are going on this property. So, this aerial is from 1942. Just 2 years earlier in 1940, the city of Clearwater established the North Greenwood Cemetery that Aaron's going to talk about in the next presentation. But the resolution that the city of Clearwater made at that time to establish that cemetery, it said that that this cemetery, this other cemetery that existed for Black people in Clearwater at that time, was inadequate for continued use, maybe because it was full, and that everyone, after 1940 should be buried at this other African-American cemetery that was established, farther north in the North Greenwood neighborhood. So on this 1942 aerial, we can see that there are many more cleared areas within the square. We can also see that there's a dirt road that goes north-south through the middle of the cemetery, and there are many paths that lead to it. So it's obviously still being used at that time. as we go forward into the 1950s, we start to see a lot more changes around the cemetery. Here you can see the Williams Elementary School has been built, this U-shaped building that's down here. We also see the Pinellas Junior High School that's up here in this area. But the cemetery is still very clear. We can see Pierce Street is going straight up to it. It's, it's very clear of bigger vegetation. We can still see some light spots that are probably for burials that are within the cemetery. 1954 is when we see the kind of erasure start to happen with this cemetery. So newspaper articles from the time, which you can see here, detail an effort by the city of Clearwater at that time to pave and improve streets throughout the city, including in African-American neighborhoods. A Tampa Bay Times article from October 20th, 1954, which you can see here, reported that the city council saw the paving project as a way to continue segregationist housing practices within the city. By improving and paving roads in African-American neighborhoods specifically, council members hoped that it would be, and this is a direct quote from the article, an inducement to confine Negro home building and purchasing to the existing area. City Commission meeting minutes from November 15th, 1954, which you can see right here, detail a fee assessment for these improvements. So, they're improving the roads and the sewers to try to keep, the African-American community living in this specific area, but then they're also charging those property owners for the improvements that are being done. So property owners were notified of the amount they owed the city for the improvements along their property and advised that if their assessments were not paid within 30 days, that a lien would be placed on their property with an additional 8% interest rate per year. So this document, the City Commission meeting minutes, Allison Dolan provided these to us, but it wasn't really, until we were in the middle of our first GPR survey, and we really took another look at this one, that we realized how important this one document was to figuring out the location of the cemetery. So here's a zoom in view of it that you can see right here. It says St. Matthew's Baptist Church Cemetery. And the cemetery was assessed $1,251.07 for pavement and $619.70 for sewer along the 330 feet of the cemetery fronting Missouri Avenue. But most importantly, this document gives us the legal description for the cemetery location, and it also gave us the cemetery's name. Also, at around this time, the eastern 30 feet of the cemetery was conveyed to the city of Clearwater as road right-of-way for Missouri Avenue, which decreased the overall size of the cemetery. So, like I said, we figured this out while we were in the middle of our first GPR survey, but with help from Paul Guzzo from the Tampa Bay Times, we were able to then find other legal documents that tie the cemetery to this specific location, as described in that document. So we were able to get the plat map for the area, which is the R.H. Paget subdivision in the right section in Township and Range. And then I was able to bring that into some mapping software and use that legal description to get an idea of the cemetery location, which from the document was the eastern half of Lot 1 of this Paget subdivision. So this is Lot 1, and then this is the eastern half that you see here in red. And then there's a more zoomed in view so that you can see it. So with this debt for the road improvements, and now, that was now put in place on the property, the Church Board of Trustees for the St. Matthew's Baptist Church in May of 1955 sold the cemetery property to 3 white developers, Milton D. Jones, Chester B. McMullen Jr., and T.R. Hudd for $15,000. The money was used for much needed improvements to the church and likely to pay off the lien that had been put, on the property for road improvements. Jones, McMullins Jr., and Hudd were the same individuals who were paid by the city of Clearwater to move burials from the North Greenwood Cemetery to a new cemetery they established in Dunedin just a year earlier, which was Park Lawn, in 1954. It's unclear how many burials were moved from St. Matthews to Park Lawn after they purchased the St. Matthews property in 1955. But in February of 1957, McMullen and Jones sold this same property, the St. Matthews Baptist Church Cemetery property, to Raymond L. Round for $110,000, which was a $95,000 profit on their investment. So around the time McMullen purchased the property, Rogers Paget, the grandson of Robert Paget, the original owner, remembers visiting the cemetery with his family. According to reporting by Paul Guzzo of the Times, the Paget family were upset that the cemetery had been sold to a developer. And this is a quote from Paul's article. They parked on Missouri Avenue, Paget recalled, and walked about 50 yards through white sand overgrown with sand pine trees and myrtle bushes. Suddenly, there were grave markers. Until I saw them, it didn't look like a cemetery. The area we were in had about a half dozen stone markers, but none were big. Other graves, he said, had temporary metal markers. So this is an aerial from around that time in 1957. And here you can see Missouri has been paved. And we can see the cemetery property here with the some of the brush and the kind of sandy soils that Mr. Paget described. And then in December of 1959, Mr. Round sold the same property to Sapir Investment Company for $105,000, which then developed the Montgomery Ward store in that location, which you can see here on this 1968 aerial. In order to make the new store more accessible, the city of Clearwater approved the extension of Pierce Street, which you can see here to the east towards Missouri, just to the south of the store and through what was once the cemetery, in May of 1961. Construction of the Montgomery Ward started in late 1961, and the store opened in February 1962. And that's how this cemetery was erased from the landscape of Clearwater Heights. And today we can see that this property looks much different than it did prior to the 1950s. But thankfully, it remains in the memories of the community members and the descendants who, fought to bring this to the forefront so that we could investigate and figure out, where the cemetery was. So with all this in mind, and before we found that key document I described already, we started our GPR survey on Mr. Crumb's property in an open grassy area that had been just behind the old Williams Elementary School. The elementary school had been around in this area. We did 5 grids, and these are the 4 big ones that we did here. We did a 5th grid over here in this corner, and I'll show that when I talk about the results for the other area. Here are our results for those 4 initial areas. We did not find any definitively grave-like objects in grids 1 through 5. We did find evidence of lots of disturbance from buried water and drainage pipes. Those are the bright white lines you can see, all these ones in here. We also found evidence of large-scale soil disturbance from previous construction and fill activities. The ground appears to be full of lots of irregular concrete rubble, which are these smaller white splotches that you can see all throughout the area. And you'll really see the contrast between this area and what we found in the other area when I show you the results from our phase 2 survey. So after we found the document with the legal description for the cemetery location, Zeb again went to Mr. Crum, and he again very graciously allowed us to come out and survey the second area of his property. We completed the survey over the last weekend in February so that we could access the parking lot area that you see here. We completed 6 additional GPR grids within the expected footprint of the cemetery over those 2 days. So that red line is our kind of possible footprint for the cemetery. And then these, obviously yellow boxes are the areas that we surveyed with the number of the survey grid. And here's an overview of the results. These are between 3 to 5 feet beneath the surface. And you can see there's quite a difference between what we see here and what we found in the other area. These white rectangles that you see here, they're oriented east-west. They're consistent with the size of a coffin burial. They're at the depth we would expect for a historic burial. They're oriented east-west. Now I've picked them out in little red rectangles so that you can see. The dashed lines represent areas of additional buried objects that warrant more investigation as well. It could be consistent with burials that are moved or just maybe ones that aren't as clear as the ones that I've picked out in the solid lines. The blue lines that you see are the location of stormwater drains and other buried utilities. I'll zoom in on some of the individual areas, but overall we located just around 70 individual grave-like objects within the footprint of where the historical documents tell us the cemetery was located. So this is that north portion that you can see, grid 6, 7, and the north part of grid 8. So you can see these, these possible, these grave-like objects are organized in rows. They're very rectangular. It's also worth noting that there is, potential for burials outside of the fence that you see here, and possibly even under Missouri Avenue, although we did not survey that area. But because that eastern 30 feet of the cemetery was conveyed, for the right-of-way for Missouri in the 50s, there is that potential. And this is the south area that we surveyed. The south area had the highest concentration of possible burials. And like I said, they were organized east-west in rows, just like we have seen in other cemeteries that we have surveyed. So just an overview of our findings. There are around 70 possible graves were located with GPR throughout grids 6 through 11. The characteristics of the possible burials are consistent with the size, shape, depth, and patterning of coffin burials found within a historic cemetery that we have seen in other examples where we have surveyed. The most shallow begin less than 3 feet below the current ground surface, and the most deeply buried begin between 4 to 5 feet below the ground surface. Some are very defined, while other areas might be disturbance from grave removal in the past. Erin's going to talk a little bit more about that in her presentation. And we also saw lots of, utilities like storm drains and other things present within that area. So also I've been reviewing some funeral home records and death certificates, and that has revealed, possibly 545 individuals, names of individuals who might be buried at St. Matthew's Baptist Church Cemetery. But so this is one of those death certificates. This is for a stillborn infant who passed in 1931. And you can see on the portion of the death certificate where it says the place of burial, it says St. Matthew's Cemetery, and then in Clearwater in another section. But more research is needed to confirm these and to see who is now buried at Park Lawn or other area cemeteries, so we can kind of figure out where people are. Also interesting, one of the only other death records that I found that specifically says St. Matthew's Cemetery and doesn't say Clearwater Colored Cemetery or some other kind of permutation of that is this one. It's an application for headstone for a veteran, and it's for William Yopp, and he was a master sergeant in the Army Corps of Engineers. He passed in 1951, and it says on here that he was buried in St. Matthew's Cemetery in Clearwater. And so, like I said, he passed in 1951. So this shows that some people were continuing to be buried at the St. Matthew's Baptist Church Cemetery even after the North Greenwood Cemetery was established in 1940. And also interesting, this shows that, his grave appears to have been moved to Parklawn. If you put his name into Find a Grave, you'll see here's a picture of his headstone at Parklawn Cemetery. Just like on his application, it's an upright marble headstone. It has the same information that you see here. So far, I've only found 10 headstones on Find a Grave that are at Parklawn that match with names and death dates for those buried at St. Matthew's. But obviously, I haven't looked through all 545 names yet. And it's also necessary to actually visit the cemetery, not just look on Find a Grave to do these sorts of confirmations. So just to end with some recommendations, it's important to note that under state statute, Chapter 872, Florida statute, that whether they're on public or private lands, human remains and human burials are protected by law in the state of Florida. And that also, issues related to the St. Matthews and to the North Greenwood cemeteries, the state does not have jurisdiction in these cases. These are local issues that local governments and property owners and the community and descendants need to come together to figure out. So our recommendations are that, the property owners should consult with the African American community leaders, community members, and possible relatives and descendants of those buried in the cemetery on next steps. That they should hire a cultural resource management consultant to continue geophysical investigations to define the boundaries of the burial area and develop an appropriate cemetery management plan for the property, and that they should conduct no ground disturbance in the area defined as a cemetery until the boundaries of the burial area have been further defined and in keeping with the law.
All right. Well, thank you, Rebecca. I was looking in some of the chats and everybody is saying, great presentation and everything. And it was. Jeff, I don't know if there's anything you want to add or anything you want to say.
No, thank you for the opportunity. Becky covered it all really well. So I'm just curious if there's any questions, and I'm sure we can get to those after Aaron's presentation. But
okay.
Thank you again for having us.
No problem. All right. And thank you, Jeff. The second place that was scanned was the Eggman and Holt school grounds. And for that, we have the archaeologist from Cardinal, Aaron McKendry.
Thank you so much.
Not a problem. You should be able to share.
Yeah, let's see if it'll allow me in here. Continue, please. All right. Share.
I see me real big.
Yeah, that's you. All right. I would just like to take a minute and say thank you to Zeb for organizing this meeting this evening and for inviting us to share the information we have with the community. We have been looking forward to doing this for some months now, and unfortunately it's been held up a little bit, but we're really all very happy to be here this evening for everybody to get this information that we have. So my presentation, I really have a fair bit of information, but I would like to attempt to keep it within 15 to 20 minutes. A lot of some of the things that the previous presenters and speakers have talked about have already been touched on, but I'm going to go into some detail a little bit more in this presentation. So the presentation will cover a couple of different things. I will summarize the work completed to date at the North Greenwood Cemetery site. I will briefly discuss the ongoing work. And finally, I'll provide some examples of what the ground truthing process looks like. And if I hadn't mentioned previously, I am an archaeologist with Cardno, and I'm the project manager for the North Greenwood Cemetery site. So
I have a question for you before you go on. I see your notes, but it shrunk the presentation slide. Is there a way to make that larger, the presentation slide?
Yes, hold on one second. Did not have this issue before. All right, can everybody see that fine then?
It never acts funky.
Oh yeah, there's like a bunch of dots that are buried there.
Becky?
Oh, sorry.
All right, so we'll just try to get through this, I guess. Technical difficulties all over this evening.
Okay, I mean, if that's the only way you
Right,
can show it, that's fine.
No, I've got it. Don't worry, Zeb. I'm all over it. So first, I'd like to go over some information about the project and then a little background on the site.
Slide now.
Aaron, it still hasn't come up.
Yeah.
Goodness. Are you kidding right now with this?
No, we only kid on Thursday. Me and Pat.
Yeah.
This is fantastic. All right. How about now?
Yes, there you go.
Oh, yeah, there we go. We'll go to start over and we'll be all set. Oh, it went back to the other one.
And that's okay.
There we go.
Excellent. All right, so we start again. The North Greenwood Cemetery project area is defined by the estimated cemetery boundary. The boundary was established based on historic maps and historic aerial images and is outlined here in red. Currently, the project area stretches across land owned by the Pinellas County School Board, the Homeless Empowerment Program, and two city streets, Holt Avenue and Engman Street. The cemetery, which we are referring to as North Greenwood, was originally agricultural land until the city dedicated 1.5 acres to be used as a cemetery in 1940. The remaining portion of the larger parcel was used for recreational purposes. The cemetery was in active operation during 1940s and the early 1950s. Unfortunately, plans to build a swimming pool immediately north of the cemetery and an African-American high school on the southern portion of the parcel triggered a request to relocate the graves. In 1954, the cemetery underwent a relocation process to a new cemetery site in Dunedin, Florida. The new site, now called Park Lawn Cemetery, was purchased by Chester McMullen Jr. along with Milton Jones for the relocation process 2 weeks prior. However, some graves likely had no markers and were never identified for relocation. In 1961, the Palmetto Elementary School was built on top of the former cemetery site. The Het parcel has remained relatively undeveloped with the exception of parking lots and mobile homes. The cemetery's existence is well documented in official records, historic newspapers, and in living memory. Knowledge of the cemetery prompted discussions between the Clearwater Heights Reunion Committee and the NAACP with the city of Clearwater. These discussions resulted in one simple question: was the cemetery moved in its entirety? In order to answer this question, Cardno established research goals. First, to identify the boundary of the cemetery through background research with historic records, and then using non-invasive survey GPR techniques to determine if extant burials were present, and if so, where were they located? Equally as important was to verify the mapped boundary of the cemetery versus the land use boundary. Now, discrepancies between platted parcel boundaries and land use happen frequently. Unlike two neighbors dealing with fence lines being off by a few feet, when dealing with the cemetery, the actual land used for burials is the cemetery boundary, regardless of lines on a map. And so we developed this research design was to first establish target survey areas and then prioritize those areas for survey. And then to identify the appropriate ground penetrating radar equipment based on the project environment. And finally, to confirm findings using multi-instrumental verification of subsurface anomalies. Now, all that means is that we scanned the same area using 2 different GPR devices, and then we look at the results of each separately to see if they agree. Now, this map that you're looking at here outlines the target areas surveyed by ground penetrating radar equipment. The area highlighted in red is our project area. It's our priority target area where we focused our surveying efforts. The area surrounding that, highlighted in blue, is our buffer target area. Surveying this additional buffer area around the project area helps us answer the important question of cemetery land use, meaning, are there any burials outside of the estimated cemetery boundary? The area you see, the 2 areas there that you see highlighted in green are our overlap target areas, and these are areas that we surveyed with more than 1 GPR device. At Cardno, we have at our disposal 3 different ground penetrating radar devices. So the first 2 that you see left and center are what we call the stream GPR devices. And then the device you see all the way to the right is the standard GPR device. The stream devices have large scanning arrays, which allow for rapid scanning capabilities. The standard GPR has a compact array, which is lightweight and highly maneuverable. It allows for scanning in and around tight spaces, and it was utilized very effectively around the school building, which you see pictured there in that photo all the way to the right. Because we have 2 city roads in our project area, we chose to use the stream devices on the roads. The larger 32 and 36 antenna stream devices have a proven capability of deep subsurface imaging that is used to explore areas beneath roads, which often include complicated overlapping utilities. So this map that you see here shows the overall area scanned by the 3 separate GPR devices. The next few slides will be focused on certain survey grids, specifically in the overlap area. But what you see right now on your screen, the area highlighted in yellow were scanned by the stream devices, and the area highlighted in blue were scanned by the standard GPR device. So the next few slides should give you a better understanding of the analysis process that happens once data collection in the field is complete. And so first, we'll take a look at these 2 grids that you see here, grid 1 and grid 7. Again, those are areas where we currently have verification from 2 or more GPR devices. First, we'll take a look at grid 1, which is to the west of Holt Avenue. And it's sort of oddly shaped because it wraps right around the corner of the school building, that northeast corner of the school building. This is an image of the entire survey grid at approximately 3.5 to 4 feet below surface. At this depth, you can see the reflections of some clearly defined buried objects, which are outlined in solid red in the image to the right.
What's that?
These reflections are what we would expect to see from a coffin. They are the appropriate dimensions with east to west orientation and are laid out in organized rows. Other less defined areas surrounding the coffin-like objects, you can see there outlined in the dashed red line, are areas of possible graves with disturbances that may be due to cemetery activity or the relocation process. Next, we'll take a look at grid 7, the large green rectangle to the right of Holt Avenue on the HEP parcel. This image is approximately 2.5 to 3 feet below surface, so it's about a foot shallower than the last grid that we were looking at. Here again, you can see the clearly defined coffin-like objects in several organized rows, with a larger area of possible graves to the north. This area has well-defined edges, which is what might result from trenching activities, either mechanical or hand tools. Also, the reflection is rather bright and consolidated, which may be a result of compaction or the inclusion of buried objects. So investigating that interface between the coffin-like objects and the more disturbed area may shed some light on the cemetery relocation process that took place in 1954. This map that you see here shows the combined results of all GPR survey grids within the cemetery boundary. 54 coffin-like objects were identified, along with several areas of possible graves and areas of disturbance. Several clusters have been identified on both parcels. The areas outlined in yellow are part of the expanded GPR survey. The purpose of the expanded survey is to identify boundaries of burial clusters that were revealed during the initial survey, and to verify the cemetery land use boundary. 2 areas of disturbance were identified on the Het parcel in the lower southeast right corner here. They do not appear to be attributed to utilities, and the location of these disturbances along the cemetery boundary and outside of the boundary make this area a priority for our expanded survey. Collecting additional data in these areas will accomplish 2 things. It will help clarify if the disturbances are due to cemetery activities, and it will help determine how these areas need to be investigated during ground truthing, if at all. The more data we have beforehand, the more effectively we can execute a ground truthing phase as efficiently as possible. So the purpose of the ground truth process is to verify GPR findings through physical confirmation. There are 2 stages of ground truth. Delineation involves mechanical stripping of soil to expose the tops of grave shafts so they can be recorded and mapped. Excavation involves the controlled removal of soil from the grave shaft to expose the coffin. This is a minimally invasive technique which provides that physical confirmation of the GPR findings. So the next few slides are of the recently completed excavation at Zion Cemetery in Tampa. All of the work was based on the extensive GPR survey conducted at the site beforehand. And the project was guided throughout by the advisory committee and had a really positive outcome because of the community involvement. So this first image shows the beginning stage of mechanical stripping and delineation. This is a controlled process that removes the soil overburden in really thin layers. All of the stripping is monitored by an archaeologist, and it's important to note that the surface of the ground is scraped back using a flat-bladed shovel. Nothing is scooped out by the heavy machinery. And this image is an example of what it looks like once the overburden has been removed and the tops of the grave shafts have been exposed. So the dark organic soil that you see above Jeff's hand is the overburden. This is that soil that has accumulated or been deposited on top of the ground surface where the burials are located. Now, a grave shaft is simply, as we know, a hole dug into the ground in which the coffin is placed and then refilled with soil. When it's refilled, the soil becomes mixed and the resulting color of the grave shaft soil is different from the surrounding soil. And that's exactly what we're looking for during the delineation stage. We're looking for the different soil colors that indicate that we've identified a burial shaft. Once the tops of the grave shafts have been exposed, archaeologists clean, measure, and record the grave shafts. All of the soil is screened, and any artifacts that are identified are associated with that burial and then returned to the grave shaft once the work is complete. Here in this photo, you can see the controlled excavation of one of the grave shafts. The soil is being removed by hand in levels, just a few inches at a time, in order to expose the coffin. And in this case, the entire coffin lid was successfully exposed and recorded without disturbing any human remains. So this is an aerial image showing 2 rows of grave shafts. Here's the first row here towards the bottom of the screen, and the second row is across the top of the screen. And this is one of the excavation units. Now, findings from this excavated unit confirmed that the other burials are also intact. And so with that excavation, that single unit allows for verification for all of the other surrounding grave shafts that you can see exposed there. So without ground truthing, standalone GPR results may be called into question in the future. And ground truthing provides the physical evidence that validates and supports the GPR survey results. So to summarize, our ongoing work is focused on identifying the boundaries of the burial clusters that were revealed during the initial survey, refining cemetery land use boundaries in the buffer areas, additional data collection on areas of disturbance outside of the cemetery boundary, and developing an archaeological work plan for cemetery management. Now, of course, consultation, which is always an ongoing process, we recommended establishing an advisory committee, which includes the community. The success of the work completed at the Zion Cemetery is due in large part to the work of the advisory committee in collaboration with the community. And that sums up.
Cool. Thank you so much, Erin, for that. I know that a lot of hard work went into it. Next, we have Kimberly Hinder, who is a senior archaeological historian.
Thank you. My comments are very brief. I just wanted to add that, we find that these cemeteries are extremely important, not only to the descendants, but also to the greater African American community and to history at large, because a lot of this African American history gets lost. So we really want to recognize these sites for their importance, but there's not a whole lot of information that we can often find on these sites. I think Rebecca and Erin's presentations went through and talked about a lot of the legal documents that we can find on these properties, which are very helpful in establishing, the boundaries and establishing where we can find it. But what we really need is the community input. Rebecca said, without the gentleman coming out and saying, you need to look a little further northeast, the property would never have been, that cemetery would never have been found. So we really need your input. I know that I've done some research on the cemetery that Erin was talking about, and we have limited death certificates that we can look at online. Most of the certificates predate 1940 that we can easily get access to. And a lot of those death certificates just say what city the person was being buried in, not necessarily what cemetery. So we really want to get the public's input. If any of you know people that were buried in that cemetery, please, reach out to us. If you know of some of the records, where some of the records are for the funeral homes, for example, that would be tremendously helpful. On that cemetery in particular, Nathaniel Williams, his funeral home handled a lot of the original burials, and Larkin's funeral home handled the transfer to the cemetery in Dunedin. If we could find records for those two funeral homes, that would be a tremendous help to us. So if anybody has information, we would definitely welcome that information if you could provide it. We would, really like to commemorate these and have a good record for, the future about these properties. That's really all I wanted to add.
All right, thank you, ma'am. And seeing that it is only 8:15, I think we have time for a couple questions and answers. Chris, do you want to do this or you want me to? Okay, I guess that means she wants me to.
I'm sorry, I was trying to unmute myself.
Well, no problem. The first
what would you?
You got it?
Okay, let me go with the first question. I think someone mentioned decent community. What does that mean? one of the panelists mentioned
Well,
decent community.
I'll be happy to take that one. The descent community means those people that are either relatives or related in some way to those that are buried there. For instance, if you had a military burial, the U.S. Army might be. If you had a family member, obviously that would be the key descent community. But the descent community would be anybody who is related in some way to those who were buried there. And there are a lot of attributes to descent communities. It could be everything from the actual family itself to in other words, to who lived there or who worked with them. In many cases, like in downtown Tampa, people that were buried at Fort Brooke, the only descent community we had was the U.S. military, since we didn't have any actual opportunity to get DNA. There weren't any markers, et cetera, et cetera. So in that case, the Army served as the descent community. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, I think it does. And I think it may have been it wasn't decent community, it was descent community.
Yeah.
So somebody might have heard a little differently.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And there are 4 hands up.
Okay.
Yeah, someone wanted, is it possible for you to just talk a little bit about how emotional it
Yeah, that's a question for me. Go ahead and do the hands that are up.
Do you want me to do that, Zeb, or did you want to do it?
You can. That was part of the closing that I had, but I mean, if you want to talk about it, that's fine.
Let me mention that when we were doing the Zion cemetery, there were people who were actually in tears, dealing with not just the fact that there were these burials, but more that these burials had been forgotten, I guess, or had been in a situation where nobody seemed to care about them. And it was very emotional for those that had to deal with it, and even more emotional for the people that lived there. And that's always an issue, and I'm sure you'll cover that as well in your closing. But that was a big issue in Zion.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. I see Jacqueline has her hand up. It says Jacqueline's Galaxy A50. So I'm gonna unmute you now, and Jacqueline, if you're there, you can go ahead and ask your question. Jacqueline? Let me make sure I'm not messing this up. Unmute.
Hello?
Yes.
I don't know how are you?
Good. Go ahead and ask your question.
Well, I didn't know I had put my hand up. I'm just listening. I just think that it's very interesting what's going on. I'm just wondering, what the community is going to want to have happen with the site. I think all this work is awesome work.
Right. And we will actually cover that in the closing.
Okay, cool.
All right. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Next, I see Evan Axelbank. Give me 1 minute. Okay, Evan.
Sir, that question was from me about you just talking about what this means to you guys just emotionally and the the effort that the community now has to undertake to preserve this again. So you can either answer that now or afterwards. We just want to make sure that we get something on camera because you're the one who has the camera on for you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll do it in closing.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Bilal. Give me 1 minute. Bilal, you can say something. Bilal? Okay, maybe that was an accident for his hand. I see he's unmuted. I'll leave him up and I'll try and get back to you in 1 minute. All right. Next is Diane Stevens. Diane?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, got you.
Okay. My I guess what it is, maybe this is a comment, but I think this is a very good meeting. The one thing that I would like to see is that when you did the aerial for over on the hikes, you labeled the pictures. And so with us just looking at it, I had a hard time trying to decipher exactly where it was, even though I lived over there. So if the buildings could have been like labeled, like you had Montgomery Ward, you had those like that, I would like to see that more so on there, because it was kind of hard to kind of figure out where you were talking about, because I was wondering if you checked the land that's over there by the middle school, behind the middle school, and also behind Martin Luther King Center. So I couldn't understand whether you had a chance to look at that as of yet. That's it. That's my question.
I'm sorry, say that again. Was that to a specific panelist?
The last lady that did the one about over at the schools.
Erin?
Greenwood, yeah.
Okay. And just restate your question.
Okay, I wondered if you had an opportunity to scan the land behind the middle school, the land behind the Martin Luther King Center. And if not, maybe that's, a little bit later on, but also I would like to see it labeled, the buildings, when they did the aerial view.
Okay.
Exactly what buildings,
Okay. Erin, I'm not sure if you're still on, or Paul or anybody. Is there any scanning that's going to happen behind the school, in between the school and the Martin Luther King Center?
Yes, I'm here, Zeb. To answer the lady's question, the area, she's right. We could have labeled the map with perhaps a little more information. But the 1.5 acre plot that was the cemetery, that is the former cemetery site, is located directly on the corner of Holt Ave and Angman Street, and it runs across Holt Ave from west to east. And so any of the area further west of that, between the Martin Luther King building and that open area, would not have been part of the cemetery. Although we did scan along the western side of the school, and there were no anomalies on the western side of the school building. It is, what we've seen so far has been along the northern edge, around that northeast corner, as I showed in that grid 1, and then down along the east side of the school building, as it pertains to the entirety of the school board's parcel on that west side of Holt Avenue. So no, as of right now, there aren't any plans to scan out into the recreational fields and then further west on the parcel.
Okay. Let me ask you this question. What's the possibility that they built on top of the school is on top of the cemetery? If it's just that one corner that goes around?
Well, that's an excellent question. The fact is, as I showed in that first grid, that does go right around the school. With that standard GPR, we were able to get the scanning device right up against the building. And so we have right in the northeast corner several coffin-like anomalies that appear to abut and come right up against the school building itself, and it actually is that way in a couple of spots. And we looked at some of the architectural drawings for the building that were developed that were provided to us by the school board very generously. And based on the schematics, the foundation of the building would likely not extend more than 2 feet into the ground. And the anomalies that we've seen are well beyond that, are showing up around 3.5 to 4 feet below surface. So the area under the footprint of the school building does potentially contain some additional intact burials. But having not scanned through the footprint of the building, we just strongly recommend that that area below the building be addressed as though it does have burials intact below it at this time.
Okay, thank you. Next, Mayor Frank Hibbert from the City of Clearwater.
Seb, can you hear me?
Yes, we have you.
First of all, thank you for inviting us to be a part of this process. I wanted to ask you how you want to proceed so that we can better understand the hopes and expectations of the neighborhood and community in dealing with these issues, because this has been very educational. I appreciate all the scientists that have been on this and all the citizens who have partaken, but I want to try to get a better idea of how we can facilitate next steps.
Right. And again, all that is in the closing portion. There is an ask to the community.
Okay.
And I'm not sure when you jumped on the call, but it's not about what I want as Zeb Atkinson. It's not about what the NAACP wants or the Heights Reunion as organizations, which is why we brought it to the community so that we can get the community's input and then come back with an ask. I see that in one of the questions on the question and answer thing. It's, well, what are these people willing to do? We haven't asked for anything yet.
Well, I've been on since 6:55, so I've heard everything.
I'm sorry?
I've been on since 6:55, so I've heard everything.
Oh, okay.
I'll await your closing comments.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Let me see. Let me see. This mute. All right. Next is Barbara Sori Love, who is the president of the Heights Reunion Committee. Miss Love? Miss Love, I think you need to unmute your device.
Hi, Zeb. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I have you.
Thank you so much for an excellent presentation, you and the panelists. The information was outstanding, historical and scientific process was put in place, and we really appreciate it. And one of the questions that was asked earlier was about how do we know what's under the school over in North Greenwood? I'd like to also ask that question about the Clearwater Heights Cemetery. I think the information that was brought up was that there were probably 545 more bodies that are left there. How can we determine who's left in that area? The burial certificate for the Yop family, they are very familiar with me. As a matter of fact, I don't know if Miss Yop, who's a descendant of the Yop family, is on the program tonight, but it brings back so many memories of the community, and closure is needed. There was a question asked about burial records. There are records available at Dunedin Library. Pastor Childs was able to follow up with Dunedin Library to get answers for his family members. So that may be a place where whoever asked the question may want to start. And as Mayor Hibbert asked, I'm interested in knowing how soon can the community get together and we can find out what they want, because what I want and what they might want are could be two different things. But I think we've waited long enough, and it's time to continue to move forward. And thank you so much for all the people, the community members that are on board this evening. And we look forward to moving forward for a resolution. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, ma'am. Let me see. The last hand, I still have Bilal up. I'm going to unmute you, Bilal. And if you have anything, go ahead. It looks like you need to unmute your device, Bilal, if there is something you want to say. Okay, I'm going to say that there wasn't anything that he wanted to say. Okay. And I think, Krista, unless you saw some other questions that...
His hand came back up, so try to unmute him.
Oh, did it? Okay, give me 1 minute. All right, Bilal. I think you need to unmute your device. Bilal. That's not working.
Mr. Muhammad wanna, I guess maybe speak. He's
okay. Can you raise your hand, Muhammad, and I can find you?
Yes. Oh, okay, it went away.
What went away?
Oh, there it is.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Here it is. On the top. Muhammad? You have to unmute your device, Muhammad. All right, I see two of you here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you now, Muhammad.
Okay. The question that I would like to ask, and thank you again for the opportunity, along with those who have presented. The question now is the same question that I'm probably asking because I think it's very valid with what the mayor have asked. At this point, being that we have actually gotten to this point to verify that there is existing graves, how fast can we actually verify the next step in this process?
Okay, and for that, I think, Paul, you still on?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you. Can you talk about the truthing process and what's involved in that?
There is one additional step before we do ground truthing. We need to finish the remaining areas of GPR testing that Aaron had laid out. We want to make sure that we complete that absolutely, so we don't test unnecessarily. One of the most important things for us is to not disturb anything unless we know exactly what we are doing, and then complete the work plan and get that approved by the community. Make sure everybody has a chance to review and has a chance to comment on that. And the work plan will have specifically what we are going to test, exactly how, exactly where, exactly how much. So that's very important to us that that everybody knows and agrees to what we're testing. We don't want to just go out there and, as you mentioned earlier, show up with a heavy equipment and have people be concerned. We want to make sure everybody knows exactly what we're going to be doing and how much. So time frame is going to be, it's going to take us several weeks to finish the additional GPR testing. And then I think an additional 30 days beyond that to actually do the ground truthing. So we're probably looking at 45 days. Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's what we said at the meeting when we were last together. Is that correct?
Yes, Paul, you are correct. As of right now, we are scheduling the timeframe to go back out into the field and conduct that additional GPR survey at the site. As Paul said, it's really important that we have that information before any heavy equipment or any plans for moving heavy equipment occurs. And, you know, the process is not only in the field, but then the analysis afterwards, and then developing a work plan that, again, as Paul mentioned, we would provide, and it would be looked at for comment and review from the advisory committee and the different parties involved, as well as hopefully the community. And so I think what's really important to keep in mind when thinking about timelines moving forward is that each piece relies on the completion of the previous piece of the process. And so one part of the process, the additional field work, and then the analysis, and then the work plan being developed and then delivered, that has to happen before any kind of planning and logistical endeavors for the ground truthing phase. And of course, in the middle of all of that is comment and review on the actual plan, you know, to get that feedback that's so necessary from the community and from the property owners.
And as she said, I know people are anxious to get this information, but it's even more important that we don't unnecessarily disturb remains simply in the name of haste. So we'll take we'd like to take the time to make sure that we are cautious, careful, and judicious, not only with the remains that are there, but with the money that we spend to do this. So both of those things are important. So I would think we're looking at a 45-day timeline is what we're looking at.
Okay, thank you, Paul and Aaron.
Zeb, could I jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to come to you and
okay.
About the other side.
Yeah, and of course, Paul and Aaron are speaking on behalf of the North Greenwood Cemetery. And just to be clear, the property at the St. Matthew's Baptist Cemetery at the Crum property, of course, is not as far along as the North Greenwood project. And this can be a discussion that the Crum family can have based on the recommendations that we provided in our preliminary report, and can have that conversation with the community. And I think this is a great opportunity for the city of Clearwater to step in and provide, can facilitate that conversation along the way with you and community members, the reunion committee, and the Crum family. So I think that process has still yet to play out, but all the information is there to begin that conversation.
Thanks, Jeff. I did speak out of turn. That's I was speaking for the Greenwood, not for the Crum property. So
no, that's fine. Right, two different properties, but that's fine.
And that's no problem. I caught that. That's why I was going to come to you, Jeff, for the other property. Let me see. I see Miss Love has her hand up again. Give me 1 minute.
Mr. Bilal has been able to unmute his, by the way.
Oh, he has? Okay, good. I will come right to Bilal after this. Miss Love, go ahead.
Yes, Jeff Moats did answer my question. My question was going to be, were they speaking about both properties? So okay. Yes, the answer is yes, they're concerned about completion on both properties. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. Bilal. I see he's unmuted. Bilal? Let me see if I go unmute him now. Unmute him. Unmute your device again, Bilal. Okay, you're unmuted. Go ahead and talk. I can't hear you. Okay, I'm gonna leave you unmuted, Bilal, but keep trying. There was one more question that came in. It says, are caskets from the 1870s and 1890s still intact? Dunedin Cemetery was a white cemetery for a long time, and many Dunedin residents from the 1800s can't be located. Will Dunedin residents be looked into as possibly being part of the forgotten? Has anyone spoken with Park Lawn? They've been a hot mess over there for many years. You never know. And I can say that, Karen, I'll murder your name if I try and pronounce it. The Dunedin Cemetery has not been brought to our attention. So at this time and for this particular meeting, I would have to say not. But if you're interested, get in touch and we'll see what we can do. Bilal, go on once. If you want to call me, I can put you up to the speaker so you can hear. But it doesn't look like you're coming through. Okay. So that was that. There was another one. Lou asked, as a follow-up, can we link up to combine efforts to get recognition for Pinellas, Tampa Bay, African-American cemeteries? The answer to that would be yes. And if I'm not mistaken, there's also a cemetery in St. Pete that may be found at the stadium area. So we'll, definitely look into all that good stuff. Okay, it is almost 9 o'clock. So let me go ahead and close. First, I would like to say thank you to everyone who has stayed on this call. There are 52 some odd people on the call. So thank you for taking the time out of your schedules to be here. Definitely would like to thank the Heights Reunion Committee, Ms. Love, Muhammad, the Rembrandts, Ruth, Pastor Childs, they're all on the Heights Reunion Committee. Allison Dillon, who is the president of the Clearwater Historical Society, Mr. Crum and his family for their generosity in letting us do the scanning there. Clint Herbert, the associate superintendent of operations for Pinellas County Schools. Paul Guzzo, Aaron Morrow, for both of you for keeping this in the press so that we don't forget. I know there are a lot more people that should be on this list that didn't make it, and I'd like to thank you for that. For the community, for whatever the reason, the cemeteries was, it was not like it was forgotten. And I gotta say, the community has been the squeaky wheel that has kept this kind of in the forefront. I don't know why it took so long from the 40s when the cemetery was there until today to get this started to the point we are now. But, I'm appreciative of the squeaky wheel because it is a squeaky wheel that gets the oil. And the community in this instance, the Rembrandts looking for their family, the Heights Reunion Committee for being started is the oil that got us to this point. At the end of this meeting, there will be a link on our Facebook page and on our website, which is a survey. It's more of a questionnaire. And what that asks is for the two sites, remember they are independent and separate. What would the community like to see happen for the site at the what is now the Crum property? And what would the community like to see at the site, which is now the school property at Eggman and Holt? Please go and fill out those questions. They will be curated by the secretary of the NAACP, so we can put them all together. We will have another meeting on August the 31st to review what questions came in. And then that way we will be able to formulate and ask for both properties. All responses should be in by Friday, August the 28th, by close of business, 5 o'clock, if that's possible. And so that we can continue and not lose momentum as we look to reestablish the loved ones that were lost. For the community also. Now, I scrolled through the participants list, and of all the pastors that we saw, that we sent information to, I think I only saw 2 or 3 on here. But this is the time when you go to your oldest living relative that's in the area and look through the Bible to see, where that person was buried, or, these are the kind of names that, the archaeologists are looking for. Those kind of records, like Ms. Love said, if there are any records in Dunedin, I know there were some records at the Largo Library that came from one of the morticians that was very helpful in determining who was in which cemetery. But I think more so it's going to come from, your great-grandmother's Bible or your grandmother's Bible, or, some of those things. You may have even a flyer or a program from a cemetery or a loved one that, it may be helpful to have that information for reference points. So if you have that information, you can get it to us. You can get it to the Heights Reunion Committee. We can get that information to the archaeologists to help aid in their research also. And, that is what that is my closing. If you ask me how do I feel about this, I'm not from this area, but I'm still just as hurt. I have family members in Tennessee that, when you go to a person's house, they have a plot blocked off with 2 headstones in it for my great-great-great-grandparents. So I understand what it's like not to be able to find a loved one. I understand what it's like to be looked over, to have, things taken from you, much the same way St. Pete did when they built the stadium. They annexed whatever property they needed. They killed a thriving community so that they could build a baseball stadium. Unfortunately, there may be a grave there. If we look at Ridgecrest and Largo, the city wants to retake the property that is the Ridgecrest community now. But in the beginning, Black people were burned out of downtown Largo and had to go to Ridgecrest, and that's where they built their house. And now all of a sudden, Largo wants to annex them. And when you look at those type of things, I wonder, why is that? Is it because it's in between the beach and the downtown? Is it prime property now all of a sudden? Those are the types of things that, that we look at. If you heard Becca talk about the cemetery that is on what is now the Crum property, taxes were raised so that the church couldn't afford to keep that property anymore. And then 2 years later, they sell it to make, at that time, what was an astronomical amount of money. So these are the things that we need to look at. These people are playing chess, and we have to learn how to play chess. We can't play checkers anymore, right? And hopefully this is the start of the community coming together and healing from what was, 2 communities that lost, a piece of their culture, a piece of their livelihood. And without that culture, without that knowledge of self and history, where do you end up? So, that's my hope for what happens from this. And we will look forward to seeing those people that are interested again on the 31st as we discuss what the asks will be. Like I said, we'll review everything, go over everything, and then determine what our asks will be for both of these properties at that time. Again, I'd like to thank everybody for being here. I'm not sure if I sent a text, but I didn't get a reply back, so I'm going to skip that part. Krista, I'm not sure if there's anything you'd like to add before we close.
There was 2 questions about the PowerPoint slides tonight. Is it possible for us to have it for the public, for the panelists?
Yeah, we'll get the PowerPoint slides and post them somewhere and people can download them and go from there. As long as it's not proprietary, I don't think there's an issue with that. But, we'll find out once we get the slides. If we're able to get them, we will post them on our Facebook page or on a website where anyone can go there and download the slides. As long as we're able to do that, we'll go ahead and do that. Thank you all for coming and have a good evening. Thank you, panelists, for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for the invitation.
No problems.
Thank you, Zeb. Have a good night. Thank you.
You too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.